Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Stabbed to death on a bus.
We will be upping our patrols through a joint project alongside with transit police.
A teenage boy is dead after an attack in Surrey. Plus, targeting those deemed repeat violent offenders in BC.
We're also hearing that there's a small number of people that are creating a disproportionate amount of chaos in communities.
The plan to crack down and offer help to those who need it. And conviction quashed. BC's highest court rules on a woman jailed for the death of a child in her care.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away this week. There's been another disturbing attack on public transit on the Lower Mainland. This time, a teenager has died. It happened last night on a bus in Surrey. Our Leanne Young joins us live with more about the victim. Leanne, who is he?
Dan, a family member tells CBC News that 17-year-old Ethan Bestfleg was the one who was stabbed and killed last night. We spoke with his aunt, who tells us Ethan was the oldest of 5 kids from Abbotsford, and she says he was a good kid, no previous interactions with police that she knows of. And she says that he was out visiting friends last night and his mom was going to pick him up at King George Station. And naturally, his family is devastated.
This is tragic. This is a kid just going home from school or hanging out at some friend's house and being basically slaughtered.
Before the stabbing, his aunt says his mom received a text from Ethan saying he was scared, and she believes the family is familiar with the suspect and he may be underage as well. Now, the incident happened last night around 9:30 p.m. at the intersection of King George Boulevard and 100th Avenue. So that's near the King George SkyTrain station where his mom was about to pick him up on bus 503. First responders administered CPR and they sent Ethan to hospital, but unfortunately, the injuries were so severe that he later died. Right now, police believe the incident arose from an altercation between Ethan and another person. We don't really have any details on that suspect. There were lots of witnesses around, but police were mum on any other information about just what happened that led to that very tragic outcome. And so far, no arrests have been made yet.
Obviously very concerning for the community, not to mention his family. This is the second stabbing within 2 weeks in public transit on the Lower Mainland, Leanne. What are police saying about that?
Yeah, Dan, you know, folks might remember we reported on another stabbing on a Surrey bus on April 1st on Fraser Highway. So in that case, the victim's throat was slashed. Fortunately, that victim is expected to recover. The suspect is now facing terrorism charges. And as far as we know, that slashing and this stabbing are not related. Both incidents, police say, are targeted and isolated. But understandably, it's creating a lot of fear. And Mounties say they are responding to that concern.
We will be upping our patrols through a joint project alongside with transit police, given the recent violent incidents. While overall crime is down so far this year in Surrey by 14%, we do closely monitor the crime trends by location and strategically deploy our resources in identified areas.
The corporal didn't have any details on what those additional patrols will look like. She says they already do monitor safety with transit police, but this is a new project in light of the recent spate of incidents, and they'll be evaluating its effectiveness as they go. All in all, a very tragic situation. Dan?
Leanne Young reporting live for us tonight. Thank you, Leanne.
You're welcome.
The provincial government says it is creating 12 hubs across this province to deal with repeat offenders. The hubs are teams of police, dedicated prosecutors, and probation officers who will focus on targeted investigations and enforcement. As Mira Baines reports, Premier David Eby was heckled by protesters at the event in Nanaimo.
Fed up and frustrated, protesters gathered at the government's announcement. Nanaimo has been struggling, like many BC cities, to deal with crime.
It's been erupting like a huge volcano here. We've had our encampments, we've had our tent cities, we've had broken windows thrown at businesses.
Premier David Eby met with Nanaimo's mayor and city council, announcing 2 key measures to address violent repeat offending.
There's a small number of people that are creating a disproportionate amount of chaos in communities.
One measure is setting up a dozen hubs made up of police, probation officers, and prosecutors soon, the first of which will come to Nanaimo next month. The city's mayor says it's a short-term solution, but a good start.
Let's be candid about this. We face in our streets across this province the results of 30 and 40 years of failed social and health policy.
The Repeat Violent Offending Intervention Initiative hubs will be set up across BC. They'll be located in Nanaimo, Victoria, Vancouver, Surrey, New Westminster, Abbotsford, Kamloops, Kelowna, Cranbrook, Prince George, Williams Lake, and Terrace. The second piece of the government's plan is more money for policing, $16 million over 3 years.
With this additional funding, police across the province will have more resources for targeted investigations of repeat violent offenders and incidents linked to weapons offenses and stranger attacks.
The province is still waiting for federal changes to legislation for tougher bail rules after receiving a commitment last month. This community advocate says she's disappointed the province focused on enforcement and not provided more supports.
Yesterday, our outreach team saw 92 new unique faces in our community, and I think those challenges are just going to continue to get worse. I think our enforcement measures in this community has now just created this environment of desperation.
After the announcement, Eby spoke with protesters who had heckled him earlier. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
One person has died and 3 others are hurt after an avalanche in Northern BC yesterday. A group of heli-skiers got hit by a slide just after 3:30 p.m. The Last Frontier heli-skiing team tells CBC News 5 people were caught near the Bell 2 Lodge, about 150 kilometres north of Stewart. Paramedics airlifted out 1 person with serious injuries. The BC Search and Rescue Association says this shows the avalanche risk is still out there, and even more so going into the spring. The BC Court of Appeal has now quashed the conviction of a woman jailed for the death of a child in her care. They call it a miscarriage of justice. Tammy Bouvette was originally charged with second-degree murder after the infant died in 2011. Her case was reviewed by an investigation after investigation by the CBC's Fifth Estate, which revealed the Crown failed to disclose crucial evidence to her defense lawyer. The Fifth Estate's Mark Kelly has more on what the court has called an abusive process.
That was Tammy Bouvette in 2012, charged with second-degree murder after the child she was babysitting, 19-month-old Ayanna Teeple, drowned in a bathtub.
I love that little girl like my own. It's a horrible thing happened, and then I get charged with something like this. There's no justice.
The RCMP saw no foul play, but the case changed after the medical examiner, Dr. Evan Matches, said he saw extensive bruising on the girl, which he determined was typical of abused children. Bouvette pleaded guilty to criminal negligence and told the Fifth Estate that was to avoid a possible life sentence for murder. What her defense didn't know was a panel of experts had determined Dr. Match's conclusions about what happened in this house were unreliable, and that was never disclosed to Bouvette's lawyers. That expert report has since been set aside by the courts, and today's decision makes clear the court was not evaluating the work of Dr. Matches. Still, Bouvette's lawyers argued she would not have pleaded guilty if she had known about the undisclosed report. Now the BC Court of Appeal is calling her conviction a miscarriage of justice. The BC Prosecution Service admits mistakes were made and lessons have been learned, but stops short of an apology.
Unfortunately, from Tammy's perspective, it doesn't really matter what the BC Prosecution Service does moving forward because the damage has been done and it's irreparable. There's nothing that they could do to give back her life.
In 2020, the Fifth Estate unearthed that expert report supporting Bouvette's innocence. But by then, Bouvette was homeless, struggling with drug addiction, her 4 children taken from her custody.
I got put in a category which I'm not.
What category is that?
I am not a baby killer.
Mark Kelly reporting. To other news now, it is official. The BC Liberals have become BC United. Here's a look at their new logo. The party made the switch after 80% of members voted to proceed with the name change. It was a promise leader Kevin Falcon made during his leadership campaign. The hope is that the name will better reflect the party.
About coming together with a common purpose. And in our case, that common purpose is making sure that we're actually genuinely improving people's lives, doing the work on the ground, delivering on results, not rhetoric, on outcomes, not partisanship. I think that's what the public really wants to see, and that's what we're all about, is coming together across all kinds of backgrounds and perspectives to really deliver for British Columbians.
For the priorities of the BC Liberals, their priority right now is to change their name. I definitely understand why. I don't think it will change their legacy in this province. For us, we're focused on housing, public safety, making sure that healthcare is there for people, and that we have a strong economy that works for everybody.
BC United members hope the move will give voters enough time to become familiar with the new brand and name before next year's scheduled provincial election. The mayor of Surrey has ruffled some feathers of her fellow mayors with her recent claims about whether they support the Surrey RCMP. She put out a news release last week claiming that the Metro Vancouver Mayor's Committee did something it actually didn't do. For more on this, we're joined by our municipal affairs reporter, Justin McElroy. Justin, what exactly is Mayor Brenda Locke claiming?
Yeah, Dan, she essentially claimed last week that every single mayor in Metro Vancouver supported the campaign that she's been on during both her election campaign and since she became mayor of Surrey last year to reverse the transition from the Surrey Police Force to the RCMP and to stick permanently with the RCMP in the city of Surrey. And so she put out this press release, if you take a look at the board, that said a number of things, but made it clear that the Mayor's Committee sent a clear message to the provincial government that Surrey should retain the RCMP. But that's not what actually happened. The motion that the mayors voted on simply said that they wanted to ask the provincial government to make up their mind and to make a decision one way or the other. And when we spoke to a number of Metro Vancouver mayors about that, they said very much the same thing.
It's acknowledged that a delay in the Surrey police decision impacts resourcing for all police departments in our metro region. The sole intention of the motion is to encourage the province to make a timely decision.
My interpretation or my understanding of the motion that it was calling for a speedy resolution of the issue. I did not think that I was being asked to support SPS or RCMP at the time.
Oh, the mayor doubled down earlier this week, saying it was her interpretation of the meeting that mayors were saying they supported her, but every single one that we talked to today said that simply wasn't the case.
Mildly awkward, to say the least, among those colleagues. What does this actually impact the decision that's going to be made, or does it?
Well, no, not really. Ultimately, this is in the hands of the provincial government, as it has been for months. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth expected to make an announcement one way or the other in the next couple weeks over what happens. But, you know, over the last 4 years under Doug McCallum, there was a lot of consternation between him and other mayors in the region about his style of governing, about sometimes making claims that weren't always backed up by the facts. The mayors that I spoke to today were a combination of confused, bemused, and sometimes a little bit annoyed of how the mayor has characterized this. We'll see whether the next 4 years in Surrey are as a little bit discombobulated when it comes to intergovernmental relationships as the last 4.
All right, Justin McElroy, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan.
You will soon be able to enjoy an adult beverage any time of the year at several public plazas in Vancouver. City Council has approved the return of the public drinking program that started in 2020. This time it will extend year-round to 6 locations, 4 on the west side along Cambie and Granville Streets, 1 downtown, and 1 on Main Street. The location in Kitsilano will run from May to October. There you can see the locations. Kelowna RCMP are trying to figure out what caused a semi to crash into a townhome. Thankfully, no one was hurt.
Within literally a flash of a second, he completely veered into my lane and 4 other lanes, went over a meridian, over the boulevard, and as you can see behind me, struck this condominium building.
It happened yesterday morning at Cameron Avenue and Gordon Drive. The driver was taken to hospital while the 2 people in the home, an adult and an infant, had to be rescued from a second-floor balcony. Police say the truck is still wedged into the home and it won't be pulled out until engineers can figure out if the home is stable. It has been nearly a month since public transit in the eastern Fraser Valley ground to a halt. Bus drivers continue to strike for better working conditions and pay, among other things. But the union representing them says negotiations are non-existent. And as Joel Ballard reports, it's now calling on BC Transit and the provincial government to take action.
Why are we valued so much less?
For the past 12 years, Elizabeth Rue has worked as a bus driver in the Fraser Valley. During that time, she has never earned a single dollar in pension.
I never realized I was being treated that badly until we started getting the numbers, and it shocked me to find out we were being so underpaid and so undervalued.
Rue is among the more than 200 bus drivers who walked off the job 24 days ago, fighting for wage parity with drivers from nearby regions, work-life balance, and pensions.
We want to go back to work. We want to be serving the communities. We want to be driving the buses, but we want to be treated fairly.
In Chilliwack, Rue and fellow transit workers gathered. demanding a fair contract from their employer, First Transit, an American for-profit company contracted by BC Transit. But the union's lead negotiator says there's been radio silence from the employer since the start of the strike.
First Transit is not going to move on their wage and pension on our proposals on that, and so as such, they're not meeting with us.
They don't like us!
Workers were joined at the rally by the BC Federation of Labor.
Anytime you have a foreign corporation that comes in, and when they're so far removed from the community, how would they understand all the issues that are here in our communities, the issues that the workers have?
With no movement on negotiations, there's a call for BC Transit and the province to step up, to apply pressure on First Transit and ensure that sustainable public transit is available to all BC communities.
BC Transit has to do their job and make sure that the transit service is running, and if they're not doing that, then the minister responsible for BC Transit should be doing something to make sure that they are.
But a statement from First Transit tells a different story, saying its lines of communication remain open and it's willing to restart constructive negotiations. Meanwhile, BC Transit says the labor dispute is between the workers and their employer.
Hey, hey! Ho, ho!
For these drivers, it's been 24 hard days of striking, but they say they'll keep going until a fair deal is secured. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Chilliwack.
Now, BC's Labour Minister Harry Bains was not available for an interview today, but in a statement says he has reached out to both parties and again offered mediation through the Labour Relations Board. He encourages both sides to get back to the bargaining table quickly and work out a deal. BC's farming industry has taken quite a blow recently, from rising costs to extreme weather. But it may be facing something even bigger, a labour shortage, with fewer people wanting to enter into the field. Saurabh Sandhu has more.
Bill Zaltzman has been farming for over 4 decades. His father was also a farmer. But his 2 children are not going to follow in his footsteps.
I was in a runaway truck going down the highway thinking everything was going great, to find out that somehow this dream has to take a different turn.
He had to find other options, and that was scaling back his operations.
So we made a plan to start to downsize, start to diversify away from what we were doing, and sold one small farm.
It's something that industry observers have also noticed. According to a recent report by Royal Bank of Canada, 66% of farmers do not have a succession plan. It also says by 2033, a shortfall of 24,000 general farm, nursery, and greenhouse workers is expected to emerge.
The key question we attempt to answer in this with our partners is, how are you going to stem this labor and skills shortage that we're going to be facing? And how can we proceed forward not only to stem those skills and that labor shortage, but also how to be even stronger in the future?
The report also says by 2033, 40% of Canadian farm operators will retire. Experts believe this could lead to a severe problem as young Canadians are not taking up farming. And there are several reasons for their lack of interest.
One, of course, is land affordability. It's just so expensive just to acquire the land.
It's expensive, guaranteed. Agriculture is not a cheap program to get involved with.
Many believe climate extremities are also a growing cause of concern for the farming community.
We're experiencing a lot of extreme weather events, climate events that have jeopardized the viability of some farms. Either you're experiencing drought conditions in some parts of the island, or sometimes, as we saw in November 2021, severe floods in the Lower Mainland.
One solution is to invest in education for next generation of farmers and in automation.
The cost of production being so high, folks don't have a lot of capital to invest in that kind of infrastructure themselves. They're really looking to government for leadership and support to finance that kind of infrastructure.
But to address the short-term lack of skilled labor, the industry will need to look outside the country. The report pushing for 30,000 immigrants to be accepted over the next decade that will set up their own farms or take over existing ones. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Delta.
The Bank of Canada is holding its key lending rate at 4.5%. After raising rates 8 times, the central bank has paused as it looks at the impact of higher rates on the economy. Nisha Patel has more on how Canadians are coping.
Eddie Coe is shopping for a new mortgage.
They are a bit more than what I expected.
Since he bought his condo 5 years ago, interest rates have soared. Now he's up for renewal and expects his monthly payments could go up as much as $800 a month.
We saw the rates went up and up and up, and our hearts were just like, well, having heart attacks at that time.
He's thinking about driving Uber to earn some extra cash and pinching his pennies to pay the bills.
We are cutting costs from our food, cutting costs on our entertainment expenses. Anything that we can see, we can save.
But less spending is just what the Bank of Canada ordered to slow the economy and cool inflation. On that front, the central bank says it's winning. From a peak of 8.1% last June, inflation has now fallen to 5.2%. The bank forecasts a drop to 3% by this summer.
Our message is plan for inflation to come back down, plan for price stability.
Still, the bank expects it will take until the end of next year to get back to the target of 2% and urge Canadians to be prepared.
It may be necessary for interest rates to stay elevated for longer to get that job done.
Despite those higher interest rates, the economy has proven resilient, and experts say the prospect of interest rate cuts this year is unlikely.
They are not going to be in a hurry to cut them when inflation is still above its target.
Coe plans to lock into a fixed-rate mortgage, so at least he knows the payments won't go any higher.
It's just living day by day, paycheck by paycheck. There's no way for us to save any more extra money.
A tough decision many Canadians will face in the months ahead. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Johanna Wagstaff's off tonight, so Kuljeet Kaila is here on a lovely day. Bit of a contrast to the beginning of this week.
I'm calling it a no complaints weather day.
You hear that, everybody?
You're not allowed to complain. Perfect amount of breeze, perfect amount of sunshine. I was encouraging everyone in our newsroom to get outside, even just for a few minutes, take it in, because there is a little bit of rain coming, and it's not coming just once, but it's coming twice in the next few days. We still have a bit of a wind warning for the Juan de Fuca Strait for Greater Victoria. We saw some and felt some wind all day today on and off the coast for Vancouver as well. That is going to die down by tomorrow morning. For the forecast, we're seeing a low pressure system making its way in. This will come at around Thursday, 9-10 a.m. A light sprinkle, not too much, but following that is another low pressure system just in time for the weekend, for Saturday and Sunday. So we're going to see a bit of rain for both those days. For today, the sun sets at 8 p.m. under some sunshine and 8 degrees, rises tomorrow under cloudy conditions at 6:25, remains cloudy for the rest of tomorrow at 9 degrees, a little bit of sprinkling possible in the morning, and then after that, we return to rain just in time for the weekend, but I'll have those details and I'll break down just how much rain we're going to get coming up, Dan.
That sounds great. Thanks, Kuljeet.
You're welcome.
We have some sad news for you from the BC sports world. Family and friends are devastated after a former professional hockey player from Richmond died on the ice this week. The president of the Richmond Sockeye says 38-year-old Raymond Sawada collapsed on the bench at the Richmond Ice Centre on Monday night. He couldn't be saved. Sawada leaves behind a wife and 2 young daughters. He played 8 seasons in the American Hockey League and 11 games with the NHL's Dallas Stars. Sawada had worked as a firefighter in Burnaby since 2017. An online fundraiser for his family at last check has now raised more than $240,000. The Federal Minister of Health was in Vancouver today announcing funding for health care in this province. We're going to speak with him in studio after the break. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream this evening. There has been some controversy over a recent tourism push by Regina. But ever wonder how the capital of Saskatchewan got its name in the first place? Alexander Kwan explains how it's evolved over the years.
Regina. It's known for its freezing cold, Wascana Park, and being the capital of Saskatchewan. But over the past week, this city has drawn attention for the wrong reasons. That's because of how residents of this city pronounce its name, Regina. Now, that wasn't always the case, so how did we get here? So before there was ever a Regina, this place was known in Cree as Oskana Kaasastega, or the place where the bones are piled. When First Nations people were pushed onto reserves and settlers arrived, that name was still used. But in 1882, Princess Louise, the wife of the local Governor General, suggested renaming the town in honor of her mother, Queen Victoria.
So as most people know, Regina is of Latin origin and it means queen. In classical Latin, the word was originally pronounced as Regina.
Languages change over time according to experts, adapting and transforming. So while the spelling of Regina has remained the same, the pronunciation has continued to change. Regina, the Latin pronunciation, is rarely used anymore. Instead, as a result of a process called lenition, the pronunciation was modified to Regina, which you can still find in languages such as French. The word would change even further from its origins as vowels started shifting during the 1400s in England. That takes us to the founding of this city, Regina.
1882, Regina was the proper term used in England and was the official title of Queen Victoria. And of course, you don't want to offend Her Majesty by incorrectly pronouncing her title, and that's how we ended up with Regina. I would still say that Regina is pronounced as Regina. That's how the majority of people from the city say it, and that is the current pronunciation. Now the question is this going to end up shifting at some point? Who knows?
Experts say there is no right way to pronounce a word. It all depends on the local dialect.
It's very similar to tomato, potato thing. Regina versus Regina.
Could city councilors introduce a motion that would help Regina avoid this problem in the future by symbolically changing how we pronounce the word? Yes, but they probably won't. So, in Saskatchewan, at least for now, Regina is here to stay. Alexander Kwan, CBC News, Regina.
Federal cabinet ministers are busy visiting BC, touting the benefits of last month's budget. And health is high on the list amid COVID, our toxic drug crisis, and a shortage of health care professionals.
Our governments have signed a one-year agreement to continue increasing access to home and community care, as well as to mental health and addiction services.
Duclos made the announcement at VGH today alongside BC Health Minister Adrian Dix. Last month, Ottawa and the provincial government reached a nearly $28 billion deal for health funding, but BC must be specific about where it will spend that cash. For more on the federal funding and other things announced today, amongst others, is our federal health minister, Jean-Yves Duclos. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening, Dan, and good evening to everyone listening.
You mentioned today out at VGH a one-year deal to continue increasing access to home and community care for BC, mental health, addiction services, $164 million over 1 year. When you made this deal with the provinces around healthcare funding, you said that they must come up with specific plans to spend that money. Where has the British Columbia government told you it plans to spend the money?
Exactly. There needs to be planned because these dollars are very important, obviously, but what matters even more is the outcomes and the results that come from these investments. And as you'll see and hear from Minister Dix, now, home and community care absolutely essential because most people want to age safely at home or close to home in a long-term care home. Also because we are living through a mental health and addictions crisis in this province in particular, but throughout Canada as well. So we need to invest better and quicker in access to health, mental health care, especially for younger Canadians, Indigenous peoples, and many others struggling in life.
When it comes to addictions, we know that BC is still grinding through a toxic drug crisis. We've had a public health emergency since 2016. 11,000 people have been killed by this. The numbers are unfortunately keep getting worse. We know that BC has an exemption from federal drug laws for 3 years. Is that something you're prepared to expand to see if it saves more lives?
Well, this is an absolute tragedy. You know, these are big numbers, but more importantly, these are actual people, their families, their friends who've been impacted by this terrible crisis. We salute the leadership of British Columbia and Vancouver, the police force, the community sector that have been there to help people have each other's back. We know that there is an interest in other parts of Canada because of BC's leadership. We hear requests from Toronto, from Montreal. So we look forward, to monitor the outcomes of this recent announcement and this recent policy, and to see how other parts of Canada might want to benefit from that as well.
So to that point, though, BC's chief coroner has called for a safe, regulated supply of drugs to try to save more lives. Our provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, has said the exact same thing. Is the federal government prepared to do that, to approve a safe and regulated supply of drugs?
Well, safe supply, supervised injection sites, these are all part of what we call harm reduction. Harm reduction is key because you can't care for people when people are dead. So you first need to look after them in the conditions in which they are, not to look after them, to accompany them, to make them progress through treatment. Obviously, prevention, early intervention are also key in the process of looking after each other. And that's therefore part of the broad package of measures, including law enforcement, that this province, this community, and the federal government are proposing to support.
But I guess, to follow up on that, are you prepared to allow for a larger, expanded, safe supply? Because one of the concerns we've heard from Dr. Bonnie Henry is that not enough people have access to safe supply. And if that's the issue, does it mean that the federal government needs to expand basically the permission that you gave to the province to make sure that people have the regulated safe supply of drugs?
That's a great question. In fact, it was part of our announcement today. Now, the $168 million in support for this year only to the province of British Columbia so that they can increase access to the type of things that will save people's lives and protect their health. So yes, the availability of services is key, the availability of safe drugs as well, but access to those services and those drugs is obviously very important. That's the responsibility and the role of the province of British Columbia, but we're going to be there to support them.
Minister Geneviève Duclos, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dan.
The search for Ozempic. Americans are looking to Canada for access to the popular injectable drug, often used for weight loss. That story's next.
It was the largest ever non-nuclear explosion during peacetime. 50 years later, history repeats itself, a reenactment of the explosion to mark the anniversary of BC's Big Bang.
Looks like a baby compared to the original.
Prior to the explosion, Ripple Rock was a treacherous shipping hazard. The Twin Peak rock sat just below the surface in the middle of Seymour Narrows. Over the years, Ripple Rock claimed more than 100 lives. So in 1953, the federal government decided it had to go.
So all the people who I know were here 50 years ago.
Bill Pellegrim was one of the miners saddled with the task of preparing Ripple Rock for blastoff.
It was quite an experience, you know.
For more than a year, Pellegrin spent his days drilling shafts to hold 1,400 tons of explosives. Harry Nuttall filmed the event. Nuttall was part of a team of camera operators focused on capturing the explosion for the CBC's first live coast-to-coast broadcast.
It was quite impressive and quite quiet by comparison to the tests the day before. Just all that water on top of it, boom, up and down.
Like this event, the original blast drew curious onlookers. But back in 1958, there was fear the explosion would generate a tidal wave and damage Campbell River.
I had a baby and I had him in a basket and I had food and bottles and everything. I had the car parked at the door and I was ready to take to the hills.
Folks here now chuckle at those worries, but they still marvel at the success of the blast. Ripple Rock's pinnacle was reduced by more than 22 meters. The explosion is now officially designated a National Historic Event. Melanie Nagy, CBC News, Vancouver.
Members of the largest Canadian government union have voted overwhelmingly in favor of a strike. As Marina von Stackelberg explains, more than 100,000 civil servants could be off the job this week if their union doesn't reach a deal with the federal government.
I want to thank everyone for being here.
Negotiations continue, but the Public Service Alliance of Canada says if those talks aren't successful, 155,000 civil servants are now in a strike position.
An overwhelming majority of our members have told us they can't wait any longer, and they are prepared to strike to secure a fair deal that won't see them fall behind.
Some of those workers are deemed essential and won't be allowed to walk off the job. But the union says more than 100,000 of them can. That could impact border crossings and passport applications and cause delays processing immigration files and employment insurance. Canada Revenue employees are also ready to strike, with the deadline to file taxes this month looming.
Obviously, we're looking very closely to ensure that we continue to deliver the important services that Canadians rely on the federal government for. However, we also believe in collective bargaining, and that is where the discussions at the table with the public service unions continue to happen in robust ways.
The union wants a wage increase of more than 4%. Ottawa has offered less than half that.
We're living paycheck to paycheck. We have some of the lowest paid workers within the federal public service, and those workers are currently relying on food banks in order to feed their families.
The union also wants remote work written into their collective agreement. It comes as the federal government has been pushing employees to return to the office in a hybrid model 2 to 3 days a week.
Since the pandemic, we've also seen remote work become part of everyday life for many workers. Our members have proven that they can be as effective working remotely as when they are in the office.
The union now has a 60-day window to call a strike. The federal government says significant progress has been made within the last week. It says it is committed to reaching a deal that is fair for employees and reasonable for taxpayers. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
More than 300 refugees from Afghanistan arrived on a flight to Toronto this morning. Canada has now accepted more than 300,000 Afghan refugees since the Taliban took back control of the country in 2021. But that's still 10,000 fewer people than Ottawa has promised. Rafi Boudjikanian explains.
15 hours from Islamabad to Toronto. But the journey for many of these refugees has lasted more than a year. Among the Afghans who fled after the Taliban took over the country in 2021, seeking temporary refuge in Pakistan and waiting for immigration paperwork to be processed by Canada.
It has been a long time. We applied.
This former construction contractor with the Canadian military is still waiting.
We have survived from many suicide attacks on the road.
We're protecting his identity. Recently, the Taliban captured one of his friends in Afghanistan and got their hands on the aid worker's phone, where conversations with the would-be Canadian migrant are saved.
We were doing education campaign in remote villages in Afghanistan.
Just one example of the kinds of challenges faced by Afghans waiting in Pakistan, says this immigrant services provider.
The Taliban they also have influence in Pakistan, and so some of the refugees who escaped Taliban to Pakistan, their fear and persecution continues there.
Then there are the issues once they get to Canada.
Affordable housing is a big challenge for refugees, especially the refugees who come our organization sponsorship, or even if they come under the government. So if they come under the government sponsorship, they stay in the hotel. Sometimes they ended up in the hotel for months.
From the federal government, a promise it won't leave people behind.
We committed in one of the most generous targets of any country around the world to repatriate, to bring to Canada 40,000 vulnerable Afghans, and we will continue to be there to support people as much as possible.
But advocates say more people need help, urging the government to lift that cap, a commitment it is yet to take. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada's pharmacists have a new warning tonight about protecting our drug supply. Recent demand for the diabetes drug Ozempic has sent thousands of doses to the U.S. As Alison Northcott explains, that has experts calling for more oversight.
It was going to cost me around $1,000 here in the U.S. to purchase this medication.
Amber Barr has been documenting her weight loss from the diabetes drug Ozempic on social media.
My insurance also does not cover this, so I do have to order my meds from Canada.
Showing her American followers how they can order Ozempic from Canada too. Barr says her insurance won't cover the cost because she's pre-diabetic, so she uses an online service to get a prescription from a doctor she never met and medication delivered from Canada for a lower price.
I don't want to feel like I'm stealing medication from people that need it, but I also feel like I'm a person that also needs it.
Adults lost up to 14 pounds.
Ozempic has become increasingly popular for weight loss, but with shortages and high prices in the U.S., Americans are getting it here.
We just don't have enough in Canada to supply a market that's almost 10 times our size.
BC is limiting exports of Ozempic over fears of a possible shortage. A U.S.-based doctor recently had his Canadian license suspended after thousands of prescriptions written for patients in the U.S. were filled in BC.
There isn't really anything in place to stop it at the moment.
This doctor in Maine also has a Canadian medical license, but says so far he hasn't used it to help Americans get Ozempic from Canada.
Local mom-and-pop pharmacies along the Canadian border are happy to have someone walk in and give them a handful of cash to take a medication that then they're going to take back across the border into the United States. So yeah, I think it's a big issue.
Patented drugs are often cheaper in Canada because prices here are regulated by a drug review board, unlike in the U.S.
What we're seeing is people having gaps and finding ways to access it. And the reason that we're worried about these non-traditional pathways of access is because prescription drugs, we always want to weigh whether you have a benefit that outweighs the risk of using a drug.
Alison Northcott reporting. How do you survive underwater after a plane crash? We're going to show you some tips that could save your life. Stick around.
It's crazy. I just never pictured myself graduating at a university. I'm a mature student, so my heart's beating so fast. I'm so excited and nervous. It means so much, especially to have my family here to celebrate in this way. I'm going to be crying. I know. I'm on the verge. I can feel it.
The
This is the first time in 4 years that we've been able to gather as a community to honor our Indigenous graduates. So we have 52 right now who will be honored today, and from a variety of different degree programs. So it's pretty awesome.
I'm very nervous, but I'm very excited and happy and overwhelmed. I hope to teach at the school I'm currently working at in Guinness School in Rosa Rivers.
It means the world to me. I've never really been to an event like this at the university, so it's spectacular here. I'm excited and happy and very proud to be a part of this.
Just to become a teacher, because I want to inspire and educate the youth, show them that it's possible.
I'm just really happy to be here with all my fellow graduates, and I'm really proud. We're so tight.
Land Back is a CBC original podcast where we uncover land theft in Canada and look at how Indigenous people are taking it all back.
And that's what empowered nations and empowered people to just literally steal land.
This is a consequence of your actions.
And it's time to give land back.
Land Back is out now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
You never want to find yourself in an aircraft underwater, but in that kind of emergency, there are techniques that can help you survive. Arctic Response Canada is teaching them to people who fly frequently and across remote locations. The CBC's Virginia Ann agreed to get strapped in a cage and flipped upside down in a pool.
It's something most people would never want to experience. For some, it's their biggest fear. But for others, learning how to survive a plane crash underwater is a necessity. The aircraft underwater egress training is all about saving lives.
Essentially, we're preparing people for the worst case scenario that your aircraft ditches into the water. When an aircraft ditches into the water, it almost always ends up upside down. And so we're essentially going through like the very specific skill of getting out of an aircraft when it's overturned in the water.
Like a real-life incident, the training can be nerve-wracking, but this workshop already has repeat customers.
After the fact, you get away knowing a whole lot more than you did before. You know, you always have an idea, but without doing it, you just don't have the right tools to do it efficiently. You know, like you know in your mind what you need to do. You do the training dry, but once you're in the water, you learn how to react a lot more appropriately.
It is really just about getting out. But before getting out, participants have to go underwater. Water is medium cold, and I'm feeling a little bit nervous. Just seeing that cage that is about to go underwater. The cage is a replica of a small two-seat aircraft, the kind of plane flown throughout the north. This immersive training geared toward pilots, air crews, and passengers who work in remote locations. People who need to know what to do if there's an emergency over water.
With helmets to...
Participants are buckled in, flipped forwards, backwards, and sideways multiple times. There's then a dreadful pause. And while being upside down, it's about finding the fastest, safest way out. The first flip was definitely the scariest, just because in terms of not understanding where you are once you're underwater, not knowing also what to expect and how long you're gonna be in that position. It really did help that the woman that I did it with knew how long we were, so she was able to reassure me that in a real life situation that would not happen. And then the second time around, I knew what to expect, and it really helped to know that you stick your hand on the door handle, you pull, and then you come out. But the pressure on my ear. Each scenario is designed to build confidence among students. Some studies show the training could increase the chance of surviving a water-based emergency by 250%. Did it decrease my fear? Absolutely not. But did it leave me feeling better equipped? Absolutely. Virginie Anne, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Some good training there, Kuljeet. You've got experience in some devices like that, right?
Well, I flew for years as a reporter, never even thought about taking that training. And I'm now thinking I need to sign up for that course immediately.
No kidding.
I don't do that job anymore, but that's terrifying.
Yep. And we have if you were going to be out in a device flying around, it was a beautiful day to do that.
It was a beautiful day. No complaints kind of a day. I took a picture of the West End this morning to use for our weather notes this morning. The water was nice and still, a little bit of a breeze. It wasn't too bad. Today's high was 9 degrees. Average for this time of year is 12, so it is a little bit cooler. For our low, today's low, 2 degrees. Average is closer to 5 degrees. Tomorrow morning, 60% chance of a little bit of rain about 9 o'clock, 10 a.m., just for a little bit, and might be just very light. The winds will continue light by the water, and of course for the Juan de Fuca Strait for Greater Victoria as well. Across BC tomorrow, we will see cloudy conditions and some wet conditions along the coast for Prince Rupert and Port Hardy at 7 degrees. 7 degrees and cloudy for Prince George and Williams Lake at 6. Some sunshine for Kelowna and part of the Kootenays tomorrow, so not too bad across the province. We do have rain coming for this weekend, and here are the estimates for Saturday and Sunday each for Vancouver. About 20 millimeters of rain each day, and of course higher for our higher elevations, but it won't be that bad. It will be light rain sprinkled out over 2 days. So before we get there, we will see some more sun on Friday, some light rain possible for tomorrow. Then we get through a little bit of rain on Monday. We might see about 10 to 15 millimeters before we return to some sunny conditions on Tuesday and Wednesday, and back to double-digit temperatures as well by Tuesday. More spring-like weather is on the way. Dan?
I think we'll look forward to it. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Coming up, archaeologists in Mexico have found a stone Mayan scoreboard that's thousands of years old. We'll tell you what it might have been used for after the break.
What happens is the students in the range K to 12 build robots, and they come down here and they engage in a variety of competitions. We've got the sumo competition. If you take a look at the rings, the two robots try and push each other out of the rings. We've got the two classes of size, mini sumo, and the prairie sumo is a little bit bigger. We've got cars that are driven by cables, and we've got some robots that are completely autonomous, where you put them on the ring and you step back and you may the best bot win.
3, 2, 1, go!
Haven't lost yet.
Yeah, we're both undefeated so far.
Had an intense match over here. Well, I kind of just made it all thin here. So no matter from what angle they come at, they're always going to ramp me. So it's kind of, unless they get under it somehow, which his can, is the only one.
That's the style for mine, is that I sanded these scoops down really thin, so they drive right under the other robot and lift them up and push them off.
Yes, you have to make it yourself. And so that it does tend to foster the joy of making something. And depending on your ingenuity, your machine might be better than the other one. And in a lot of competition, vehicle-type competition, races and so on, the vehicle defines how well the thing will do.
It's a really good learning opportunity, and we're really thankful for this after COVID. It's good to get back to this kind of stuff. We've still got another year after this. We're planning on coming here, taking ideas from other people, and then going back home and seeing what we can come up with for next year.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
The Surrey Board of Trade's Top 25 Under 25 Awards returns on May 3rd. Celebrate Surrey's role models and get your tickets today at businessinsurrey.com. And join CBC Vancouver's Gloria Makarenko at the annual Because Mothers Matter Awards on May 10th. Celebrate women's extraordinary achievements at this year's event. Learn more at mothersmattercentre.ca.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
Close to 100 tiny baby turtles were released back into the ocean near Sydney, Australia recently after being rescued as eggs by wildlife experts. A nest of endangered loggerhead turtle eggs was dug up from a nearby beach about 2 weeks ago after plunging temperatures put them at risk of freezing. They were carefully transported to a zoo for incubation, and last week they began to hatch. Wildlife officials monitoring the hatchlings' progress say they were big enough to set free this week. Loggerhead turtles usually favor warm ocean climates in Australia, Florida, Cape Verde, and Mozambique. They tend to return to their birthplace to lay eggs every few years. To Mexico now, and a discovery that might just prove what many armchair athletes have always believed. Sports is basically a religion. Archaeologists in southeastern Mexico have dug up a rare artifact, a perfectly preserved stone disc. It's thousands of years old and shows two figures facing off over what appears to be a ball. Experts have now concluded it's a scoreboard for a game. Apparently, one of the ways ancient Mayans showed devotion to their gods was by playing games. And back here at SFU, scientists has unearthed new discoveries about what BC might have been looking like millions of years ago, finding palm trees on a mountain.
The plants that we found, including palms, including a whole bunch of other things that people wouldn't know because they're not here now, native plants. So they're telling us a more comprehensive story than we ever had about what the climate was still warm, but it's definitely cooler than the early part of the Eocene.
The new research provides clues about what plants existed in the Burnaby Mountain area 40 million years ago. Back in those days, the climate of the province was much warmer than it is today. The results of the analysis were published in the International Journal of Plant Sciences. Fun fact, palm trees on Burnaby Mountain, now you know. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on Instagram, YouTube, and of course our website, cbc.ca/BC. Leanne Young will be here with your late local news at 11 o'clock right after the National, so please tune in before you turn in. Have a good night.